Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Tech School. I want to welcome everybody who's visiting us on our Zoom call and those who will be watching via YouTube. So, a couple quick things. If you're at CSUSM, we have an innovation challenge deadlines coming up shortly. We have two innovation challenges this semester. One is dealing with problems related to food insecurity. So we're looking for students to come up with innovative ways to help solve those problems. And the second is an open challenge. So any problem or need or something you're working on is perfect for that challenge. It's a simple executive summary submission. Tell us what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and you're able to compete for some money. So that's what we're doing, and I'll let Steven do some administrative things before we get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. For those of you who are tuning in on YouTube, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below. We want this to be opportunity for learning and growth, not just for those who are able to tune in, live on Zoom today, but also those who were able to tune in and watch this recorded on YouTube. So if you have a chance, feel free to interact with this video, leave a comment down below, share your thoughts, ask a question, and I'll hand it over to Sam to get started.
Thanks, Steven. So, Curling and Stephen reached out to me and asked me to share a few thoughts and gave me the ability to talk about whatever I wanted, which was nice. And so I picked a topic that I find interesting. And so we're going to focus on business models and business model innovation, especially for those early stage startups. I think that there's opportunities to find ways to be, successful as an entrepreneur by focusing on your business model. I think this quote with Elon Musk is probably pretty accurate. It's fairly easy to come up with ideas and even to do prototyping. What's very challenging is to come up with the process of actually building a business around your idea, right? That's where most of the time is spent. There's a funny Onion video out there that talks about, an entrepreneur who comes up with the idea and he's going to split it with whoever builds it 50% or whatever. And, coming up with the idea was all that he did. It's much more work to actually build a business model around an idea than it is to come up with ideas. We can, you can sit around with a bunch of people and come up with ideas all day. And the likelihood of any of those turning into businesses is very small because it takes a lot of effort and time. It takes a lot of, research and money. There's a lot of things that go into building a business. So, Elon Musk estimates that it's 100 times harder to really design the process of building cars than it is to build a car. And that's true with the business model. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is kind of the fundamentals of a business model, just make sure everybody has a basic understanding. And then we'll talk a little bit about innovation. And today I thought I would just use examples of companies, what they do and how they fit into this kind of innovative business model approach. So just as a quick introduction of kind of where I start from, I look at entrepreneurship from a value-based startup framework. And the idea here is that the goal of an entrepreneur is to create value, right? We often think of entrepreneurs who create ideas or entrepreneurs who sell products, but in reality, you're creating a value for your customers. And the value is a relationship between your problem and your solution and your business model. Where those three things align is where you can create and deliver value to your customers. And so it's this relationship that's important. Really the business model is what makes you entrepreneurial. A lot of people solve problems, researchers, scientists, inventors, right? They're solving problems. They may be problems that they have, or maybe their friends, or even the marketplace that exists for them. But it's not until you've created a business model that you really start to become entrepreneurial and building the tools and frameworks and processes around creating and delivering that solution to your customers. And so that's really what makes you an entrepreneur. Steve Blank up at Silicon Valley, right? His thing is entrepreneurs. It's all about a search for the business model. It's about finding the business model that does the best. And so our goal here is to create value. We do it through a solution, and we do it through a business model. We often represent, so just kind of, this is just introduction. We often represent, this popular approach now today is to look at a business model through a business model canvas. Probably everybody on the call has seen this little business model canvas before, and it just goes through the components that are important for your business. And you can see right in the middle actually has the value propositions, or the value that your business is trying to create. It's ingrained within the business model. It's the most important part of the business model. That's what we're trying to deliver to our customers, is value. And those value propositions kind of lead and guide how we set up our business model. When we boil down the business model to its fundamental parts, there are two things that it does. It defines how we build and create our value propositions, and how we sell them. So when we look at the business model, the left side of the business model is all about building and creating value propositions. It's the things we do, the things we own, the assets and resources, and it's the things we outsource or our key partners. And those are essential for us to create the value propositions for our customers. And then on the right side of a business model canvas, we see that it's about delivering those value propositions. How do we get those value propositions to our customers? Through channels, through customer relationships. There's different ways in which we can get those to them. So that's fundamentally what we try to understand, is building and selling value to our customers. And this is where we often see in like a co-founding of a business, there's often somebody who's focused on selling and somebody's focused on building. You have a business person and an engineer, right? Why is that kind of the duo that works the best? Because somebody is an expert on building and somebody is the expert on selling, and that duo can work together to deliver value. So the goal of a business model is to create and deliver that value. All of our things that we create have costs. That's why there's a cost on a business model canvas, and everything that allows us to deliver value to our customers generates revenue. And so those are kind of the fundamental parts of a business model. So with that basic understanding, I kind of want to just talk a little bit today about how to, differentiate yourself. How do you create competitive advantages? Because here's the thing that's important for you to understand within a business model or within your entrepreneurial opportunity, is that you need to have a competitive advantage, at least one part of this framework, in order for you to be successful. You either need to, you need to work in a specific niche market that nobody else has access to. You need to have a very innovative solution that nobody else is doing, or you need to have an innovative business model. The more innovation you have in this framework, the more likely you are to be successful, but you at least need one. And the reason why is if you're solving the same problem with the same solution, the same product or service, and you're selling it and delivering it in the same way, what ends up happening? Well, from an economic perspective, all the profits go away, and you compete only on price. And this is what often happens to entrepreneurs, is they're selling the same product and they're doing it in the same way. And now the only thing they can differentiate themselves from other competitors is price. So we want to find ways in which we can create competitive advantages, and so we can have profit. And so that's an important thing to think about. Now, oftentimes we do end up selling the same type of solution to our customers, right? Sometimes we create a very innovative solution that's new and interesting, but there's a lot of businesses that sell the same products as their competitors. And so the way to generate profits, the way to get an advantage, has to be isolated within the business model, right? I mean, how many restaurants that you go to they sell the same type of food, right? If you go to an Italian restaurant and get spaghetti, go to the other Italian restaurant, you get spaghetti. So how do you pick? There's oftentimes just competition on price, and et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. But we need to have competitive advantages to generate generate profit. Now, I'm going to talk about the difference between incremental and innovation, because there are things that entrepreneurs do, and I see this often, where they think they're doing something innovative, and they'll start with products, but what they're really doing is something incremental. And as a result, they're never able to create that innovative approach in which allows them to generate profits. A good example of this is, I worked quite a bit, before the pandemic in the, San Diego brewing industry. And for the most part, when we think about beer and you think about, if you're a pale ale or what, they're incrementally different from each other. Meaning like one has this subtle flavor in it and the other one has this other subtle flavor, but they're both, IPAs. So the IPA, makes it so there's similarities. They have incremental changes. And as a result, it's very hard. If you look at the brewing industry in San Diego, it's a challenging industry to be in, because how do you differentiate yourself very well? Because all you're changing is incremental. You're changing the flavor profiles of an IPA, for example. And so you're not inventing a new beer. The person who invented the IPA was an innovation. The person who changes the flavor of it makes incremental changes, incremental improvements. And they're trying to, and so the margins in the brewing industry are very small. You see a lot of turnover. You see a lot of businesses going out of business because it's a very competitive space where they're mostly competing on price. There's nothing innovative about what they're doing. Same thing. Think about when you go into like a tap room, right? This even gets to be, they sell the same beer as the next tap room down the street. So how do you change? How do you make yourself different enough that there's ability to generate profit? And there's one example that I think of that is, how successful they'll be. I don't know, but they try to do something different. There's a company in the San Diego area. I think it's called Pizza or something of that nature. And what they did is they said, okay, we sell the same beer as everybody else in San Diego. So what we need to do is we need to create an innovative business model. How do we deliver? How do we sell beer to people should be different. And so what they did, instead of selling beer by the glass, they sell beer by the ounce. And this lets people go in who have a need, who would like to try different beers, to buy small amounts of beer, try it. And then when they find one they like, they can buy a glass of beer or whatever. So the idea there is that they switched up how the business model, how they delivered the product to their customers in a way that was innovative, that helped solve the needs better of those customers. So there's a difference between incremental and innovation, and innovation changes the industry, changes a lot about what's going on. I think of some examples, and I put the NBA here as an example, just as not necessarily in terms of business. I just thinking of how the game has changed, right? So every year it seems like they move back the 3-point line to make it a little bit more difficult, right? That's like an incremental change. But what really changed, and what you see nowadays, and what the longtime fans might be upset about is that when they introduced the 3-point line, that was an innovation that changed the entire game, right? Now, when we look at NBA basketball games, it's a completely different game than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, just because of the introduction of that new 3-point line idea. So this is like a complete change. Apple, for example, in terms of innovation, when they introduced the iPhone, it completely changed the cell phone industry, right? Now, it changed the world since 2007 when it was released. Tesla is an example of innovation within a business model, right? How are cars sold? Well, in most states, cars are sold through dealers. Well, Tesla disrupts that and sells directly to consumers. And, in some places they've had trouble because the laws protect the dealers and prevent car manufacturers from selling directly to consumers. And so they've dealt with some of the challenges, but they're trying to change how you buy a car. Now, what do you expect the future will be? Well, in my opinion, I would expect that it will be more like Tesla and less like the dealer model you're used to. We're much more comfortable as a population buying things over the internet having them delivered to our house. And so cars, and we see these new startups popping up, right? I was driving down the freeway and they were building this building. And I was like, what is that? And my wife said, I think it's probably one of those car vending machines. I don't know if you've seen those pop up in places, right? You go and you buy a car and they're all stacked up and it like vends it out to you.
The Carvana, Sam? Is that the one? And Sam, are you supposed to be, are you going to show me slides? Are you supposed to?
Oh my goodness, I have not been showing slides.
Steve, I actually enjoyed just I was listening to the story, so it was fine.
Yeah.
But, Steven told me that.
I've been showing all kinds of stuff to myself, right?
That's good. I like this though. This slide.
Do we need to start all over? Okay,
nah, it's good. It was great.
I'll come back up here. We talked about the framework, right? This is what I was talking about, the framework. We talked about building and selling value, right? So, anyway, so Apple innovation, Spotify didn't invent, Apple's probably more credited for this in terms of turning music digitally. The way in which we get music is fundamentally different than it was in the past, and Spotify plays a role in that. There's more competition, and now future competition will have to differentiate themselves from Spotify, from Pandora, from Apple Music, from Amazon Music. They're all kind of doing the same thing as everybody else. And so you'll see a competitive competition on price, and then you'll see new innovations pop in so that price doesn't, that their profits margins don't fade away. So it's important that we think about innovation versus incremental changes within our business model. And finding ways to create true competitive advantages. I'm talking about two companies that I've worked with and done some things with, and tell you a little bit about what they did for their business model. The first one is a company that a friend of mine started. It's called Lucid, and just saying, like, we'll just. Their first product was a product called Lucidchart, and it was a diagramming tool. And there are big companies who do this. Microsoft has, is it Microsoft Visio? Not 100% sure now.
Yeah, it is. It's totally Microsoft Visio.
Right. And so Visio solves this problem that, diagram. People use this, especially like, there's a lot of diagramming going on in software engineering where they're building out the system and they want to diagram everything out.
I've used both of those.
Lucid and Microsoft Visio?
Yeah, because Visio is expensive.
Yes. So Ben, who's the founder, he was working on a startup with us, and we were building our software product. And he was tired of using Visio. And so he decided, I'm going to build my own tool to solve this problem. So he built, in a sense, he's doing the exact same thing that Visio does. He does diagramming, but instead of the traditional software, and again, this was years ago, instead of traditional software route, he went the cloud computing route, which was new at that time. Right. And nobody else was doing. So he switched the business model, the way in which we access this tool. And because he had an innovative business model around it, he wasn't doing software the traditional way, but was focusing on this new technology, this cloud computing model, business model approach. He was able to be successful. And, and Lucid last year in their last fundraising round became a unicorn company. They're valued at over $1 billion. All from focusing on the business model, right? A lot of companies are valuable because their business model, the way in which they do things is better than the competitors, even though they're solving the same problem. Their solution is very much the same. American Academy is another company I worked with, and this was probably 2008, 2009, right? Now this everything, all education is online, but American Academy came in and found it very interesting. They created an online school system, and what I thought was the most interesting thing about their business model and why I'm highlighting them today is that they found, and this was the kind of the cool thing that they realized, was that there are a lot of credentialed teachers who no longer teach. And the reason why they no longer teach often is because maybe they want to be at home with their kids. There's reasons why they quit being teachers and they're at home. And the American Academy says, hey, look, there's all these people who would love to work from home, and they're credentialed, they have licenses, they've got education. So we can create an online school and tap into all these people at home. And so they will be able to become an accredited online high school for using teachers that work from home. It was kind of I thought it was a pretty innovative idea. And you see companies doing this now, now we call it the gig economy. Back then, that word didn't exist. But these people who have extra resources. So it's, again, finding ways to have value through business model innovation. Another thing to think about, and again, going back to business model canvas, is you don't need to have innovation in all parts of the business model. There's lots of things going on in a business that you can find components where you can be innovative on. And an example that I'll share, and this is the difference between Walmart and Target. These are two companies that, in terms of retail, we've seen a collapse of the retail environment, brick and mortar retail, right? Everybody says Amazon, is killing all the brick and mortar stores, and et cetera. But Walmart, super successful. We've seen Target be super successful. What's going on there? Well, Walmart and Target, in a sense, basically sell the same solutions, right? If you go into Walmart, there's slightly difference, but incremental difference in products. You buy an apple at Walmart, you buy an apple at Target, the same product. You buy a box of cereal, you buy some shoes, whatever. They're selling the same thing. So how do they remain competitive? How do they avoid competing on price? Well, because they have innovation within their business model. They took a business model approach because there was not a way in which they could really differentiate themselves really well in products. Incremental differentiation. So what do they do? Well, Walmart, if we look at a business model canvas, Walmart success is in innovation on the build side. So if we're thinking back to there's two fundamental parts, build and sell, right? Walmart has spent their invested in time and energy and innovation in making sure they could deliver a product to their stores far cheaper than anybody else. And so their supply chain and their logistics and all that stuff was super important to them. So when they get the product to the shelf, right, they've got it to the shelf at a much cheaper cost. And so when they, set the price, they can set the price, whatever they choose, and their margin is strong because they have innovation in the build side of the business model. Now, Target is the opposite. What is Target about? Well, Target, especially now, you see this in their recent redevelopment plans, right? Target is focusing on creating uniqueness and innovation in the sales side of the business model. What do you think when you walk into a Target? They're trying to create an experience an experience of shopping. Whether it works or not, I don't know. But the joke is, right? You wear your sweatpants to Walmart and you get dressed up to go to Target. Why do you get dressed up to go to Target? Because it's a different experience. And they've really shifted. One of their things they're shifting to right now is creating somewhat of that boutique atmosphere. So when you walk into a Target now, it feels a little more like you're walking into one of these small boutiques. But they're really trying to focus on innovation in the sales side. What does that allow them to do? Well, maybe they don't get the product to their shelf as cheap as Walmart does. But because they have a better experience on the sales side, they can charge a little bit more. the price, they can set that price a little bit higher, allowing them to get those excellent margins they need to be successful. So this is an example where they're taking parts to the business model and finding ways to be innovative. And that's something you'll want to do too, is, you might focus on one side or the other or key component, but finding ways to be innovative in the business model. All right. I've got one more idea to kind of talk about, and then we can take questions and have a little chat afterwards. I want to talk about, there's something that I often run across, and this is something that people, Silicon Valley and everybody talks about, and I might say I disagree, and maybe people think the same way, but there is a lot of times we have a conversation about users and customers, and we group the two together. And so we have to be very careful when we're talking about users, or are we talking about customers? Because users can be customers, but in not all cases are users customers. The easiest way to tell whether or not you have users or customers is to come to the business model canvas. If you're talking to somebody and there is an expense related to that person, they're a user. If there is revenue generated from that person, they're a customer, right? A user is more like a key partner. They're an important person within the business model, but they actually cost you money as a company. They're important within your business model to create the value you want for your customers. An easy example to think about when you're thinking about users is, for example, Facebook. When I'm on Facebook and I create my profile, am I a user or a customer? I'm not a customer of Facebook. Who are the customers? Those are the people who buy ads. I'm a user of Facebook. I actually cost the company money for me to have my profile. Now, in terms of technology like Facebook, I'm fractions of a penny, right? My annual cost to the company is fractions of a penny, and that's what allows them, they could have lots of different business models to attract ad buyers. Their model builds me a little profile, allows me to do things, share pictures, talk about my life, whatever it might be that you do on Facebook. But I actually am an expense to Facebook. And so when you're thinking about how the point here is, don't think of your users as your customers. They don't generate revenue. They are important in your business model. They may be essential to deliver the value you want to your customers, but we treat them differently in how we structure our business. We treat them differently because a good example I would say is like, Facebook, if they had a really good, and maybe they do, if they had like this great marketing tool that like guaranteed that your ad would reach a person who is going to buy, Facebook might just pay you instead of giving you like a tool to share photos and to post about your life or whatever. They might say, hey, watch this ad, I'll give you $5. And then they charge the ad buyer $10 and they make money. That could be a process they do, but instead they've convinced us that we want to share our photos and share our lives. And as a result, they can get us to interact with ads at fractions of that cost. Instead of $5, our annual expense for a profile might be, 1/1000th of a penny or something of that amount. And so they're making huge margins on us. And that's, why Facebook is one of the most valuable companies in the world. I had a conversation, I put Ally Bank up here, right? A couple of reasons why. One is their innovation in their business model. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ally Bank. It's the 17th largest bank in the United States. Some of you may have never heard of it because most people interact with a bank not as a customer, but as a user, right? When you go deposit your money into a checking and savings account, the bank pays you Not all banks. Some banks charge you fees, and at that point you become a customer. But you have a lot of times you have this user base. Why do they pay you? Because their customers are really people taking out car loans, mortgages. That's where banks make their money. And so they're willing to just pay you to be a user of the bank, and they pay you an interest, right, based on how much money you invest. And then they take your money that you've invested or you've put in your bank account, and they lend it out to their customers. And Ally Bank is an interesting one because they the way in which they decide. Most banks, what do? They set up branches, right, for their users, and that's kind of a value for a user. And I'm going to go down to my branch and I'm going to deposit money. Ally, in terms of their business model innovation, said we're not going to have any branches because branches are expensive, and it's cheaper for us as a bank just to pay our users more money. So they have higher interest rates, but you can't go to your branch. You have to, move money electronically to ATMs and things like that. But they just pay you higher interest rates to access your money, and then they do a lot of car loans and manage about $172 billion in assets. So it's an example of users versus customers. Anyway, the whole point is to think of ways in which you can be innovative, and then to always think about adapting, changing. An example that I think of in terms of moving forward, right? Apple, the spaces in which Apple has been successful in the past, hardware, is they've realized is not the spaces where they have an advantage going into the future. Think of a MacBook Pro, right? It used to be, everybody used to say, MacBook Pros, those are like, they never break, they last forever. You can't get viruses on them. And then what happens, other computers catch up, they pass it up there. And so MacBook Pro becomes a much more challenging business or solution for Apple. Margins become a lot more challenging. So what are they doing as a business? They're switching to the, app-based business, service-based business, more than just the hardware business. And it's a move, I think, where they do have some advantages based on, their success in the music industry, et cetera. So you have to always be thinking about how to modify, adapt, change your business model. But anyway, that's all I have to share. But I'm happy to stay on and answer questions and chat for a few minutes.
That's great, Sam. And I think Stephen said it earlier on. If anyone has a question, you guys can type it in on chat. We'll look at what that is, and then for some of the cohort, if they want to unmute themselves, that's totally fine. But just see if we can kind of get some interactivity with, because Sam, you unpacked a lot of information, right? And I think my first question remember how you talked about the build and sale part of it? If you're a startup, are you focusing just on the sale initially, and then you're looking at how you can kind of maybe create this kind of empire where you're building and looking at the supply chain and things of that nature? Or does that depend?
Well, unfortunately, in an entrepreneur setting, you have to do everything at the same time.
Got it.
Right? Like it's not like do one, then do the other. You're in the process of doing them all at the same time. I think I mentioned this briefly. That's one of the values of having a co-founder that's different than you. If you're both business students and neither of you are engineers, right? And you're building something that it's going to be a very difficult startup. But if you have somebody who's an expert on building and somebody who's an expert on selling, then it becomes a little bit easier. And that's where you see that duo founder be successful. So it's finding people that, and that's the same thing with everything. With any part of your business model, when you're talking to investors, when you're talking, or when you're pitching your business, right? When you're pitching your business to anybody and you're talking about your team, you want to make sure your team starts off with this idea of where do they fit within the business model? So this team, it's easy when it's co-founder and you have an engineer and a salesperson, right? One person goes in here. This is the CTO, and he's the CEO, whatever it might be that title you give. But even as you advance your business along, you put the people into the business model, and you find the gaps where you're missing the right types of people. Eventually you have an entire team that lines up across the entire business model from right to left. They fill in all those spaces, and they deal with each different part of that business model. But earlier on, this is the two spots you need to make sure you fill.
That's great. Yeah, I actually like how you said like they fill people into those slots on the business model canvas. And Sunny, I think you Sunny had a little note, Professor Clarke, that there's this book called Business Model Generation. And it actually, I remember using that book at USC, and we showed people, but this business model canvas, I think, is a really great tool. And one question I have for you, Sam, it's kind of like founder journey, right? When you were starting some of the fintech things of that nature, what was some of the things that you had to kind of pivot on? We heard people pivoting on things, but even for you personally, with some of your fintech or your other early startups.
Well, an example of like a change in business model, our earliest startup, we were selling a financial technology product that was in the health benefit space, right? So it provided tax-free. It was a tool to provide tax-free benefits, right? People are familiar with, for example, what's the health savings accounts is a big one. Flexible spending accounts. That's probably the one most people are familiar with, right? Well, we had a version of that product. It was called a health reimbursement arrangement. So it's an IRS exempt benefit plan. But we provided the financial or the technology to administer those plans based on ERISA and a bunch of other regulatory issues. So it was that's basically our product. Allowed companies to offer tax-free benefits. The challenge or the thing that we did is we originally, and I'll tie it into one other things. One of the advantages of a health reimbursement arrangement, and what we were using, was that unlike other types of instruments, tax-free instruments, a health reimbursement arrangement actually allows a company to pay for individual health insurance premiums tax-free. So most people are familiar, if they're working for a company, they get group health insurance, right? And that group health insurance plan is paid for with tax-free dollars. But oftentimes people will go and, your company doesn't offer health insurance, so you buy an individual health insurance plan and you have to pay after-tax dollars for those premiums. Well, this HRA allows a method for a company to offer tax-free individual health insurance plans to people who wanted them. Anyway, it's taking a long time to explain. We originally tried to sell our product directly to companies, but in that process, we were competing with insurance agents who are also selling group health insurance plans directly to companies, right? And so there was a conflict there. And what we learned really quickly in our first year of trying to operate this business is that when buying health benefits, a company buys them based on relationships. So you might have the best product ever, but the process in which companies buy, there's a lot of distrust in the insurance marketplace. And so they go with, hey, I always bought from Joe down the street, my insurance rep, and I trust him more than you calling me on the phone and telling me they have a better product. And so we had this, we could never sell to companies because it was all based on relationships. And so what did we do? Well, we had to pivot, right? We had to change our business model. And we went from selling directly to companies to offering our product as a white label product that insurance agents could use to sell more products. And that fundamental change allowed us to grow that company and to be successful. And eventually companies like ADP and Paychex Payroll, they took our product, white labeled it, and sold it to their, tens of thousands of customers. So it was a pivot in the business model, and discovering that in our first year, it was painful to discover, because it cost a lot of money before we realized we had the wrong business model as we approached this issue.
That's great. Yeah, I knew it. You knew you did that pivot. I know it was something you had to do to go to market. We do have a question. Speaking for someone from Professor Clarke's class. Oh, Sunny, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was just going to say, speaking from someone who actually took Professor Clarke's class, that business model canvas, I actually use it for my own development of my company. So it's really a strong tool, like when you're trying to find that value proposition and finding what that problem is that the that your customers can have, and how your company can actually come up with a solution for it and bring value to it as well.
That's great, Sunny.
Thanks, Sunny.
I
was just thinking of a recent pivot that one of the companies we helped start. He might have been part of our original cohort a long time ago. Jason, right? He started Brew Catalog, right? And Brew Catalog was to help breweries, innovate in their business model. It was a tool that they could use. Breweries had been using, I would say, 20th century parts of a business model. They would sell their beer, paper invoices, writing checks, and anyway, so Brew Catalog was set up to be a digital marketplace, so breweries could sell directly to restaurants, and avoid all the hassles and administrative parts of this kind of old model they were using. But what happened? COVID hit, right? All the restaurants closed.
Right.
And, this is early stage. I think we'd only been running for a couple months, and suddenly now all the restaurants closed. So Brew Catalog at that point pivoted and switched to helping breweries sell directly to customers, which was, again, a new business model for breweries. Breweries didn't sell and deliver to customers. They had their tap rooms where they sold.
Sure.
And they sold to restaurants, but it was this need to change business model, and Brew Catalog was able to do that. Now, as things have changed, now that those founders have moved on, and instead of creating a single marketplace, they actually create marketplace, each basically sales channels for each of these breweries individually.
Nice.
So now you can go to what's Wild Barrel, brewery.com or whatever their website is, and buy from them. Those are the things they're doing.
Nice. Stephen, I know you always give a question offhand. You want to ask a question to Sam?
Yeah, sure. I think Joanna raised her hand, so we can get her next.
Okay.
Yeah, Sam. So I know you talked a lot and gave a lot of great examples about the build versus sell, right, on that business model. Do you think one side is easier to innovate than the other? Does it depend on the industry, depend on what problem you're trying to solve? Do you have any input on any of that?
I would say it depends on the person. I come from a business background, and so for me, it's much easier to innovate in those things that are very business focused, less build and engineering focused. But somebody who comes from a tech background, they're probably going to find it easier to innovate in the build side. But that's what I would say. And it's going to depend. It's going to depend. Most people aren't coming up with necessarily the most. Again, it's innovation. I'll give some. We have Brianna in our cohort, right?
Yeah.
She's using an existing business model. Hers is the Airbnb of senior care, right? Airbnb helps us define what type of business model it is. It's a business model that connects people with a space with people who need a space. In this sense, it's in an industry of senior care. Although that business model exists, it's innovative because it doesn't exist within that industry. It's the same thing like Lucid, right? The idea of cloud computing existed, but it wasn't in that specific industry. So I don't think one's easier than the other. I think it's industry specific. It's a little bit about who you are, what you know. anyway, so hopefully I answered your question a little bit, Stephen.
Yeah, definitely.
Joanna Pantages, did you have a question?
Yeah. I find that a lot of advice in the industry in general and business in general is always like bringing things down to linear small steps and like the incremental change type model that you were talking about. But I'm wondering if you think actually maybe in the case of startups that radical innovation can actually be safer, like more likely to succeed, because when you're a startup, your resources are super limited. And so you're going up against companies that already like have a lot. And so I just feel like I guess I'm asking is about like regarding radical innovation. I mean, out there, isn't that almost safer than doing what other companies can do because they know the predicted outcome?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say yes to start off. I think that as an entrepreneur, you need to think very innovative, in order to. But I'm also coming from a perspective of my interests and my research and the things that I do are focused on what I would say are like companies that have the opportunity for hyper growth. And for a company to have an opportunity for hyper growth, it has to be radically innovative. But if you individually are looking for a business that's like, we use the term lifestyle business sometimes, right? Something that's just sustainable, then I don't think you necessarily need to be radically innovative. You need to look around to your industry, your marketplace, and find ways that you can innovate in certain areas, but it doesn't have to be, going back to your thing, it's like you're resource constrained. You can't do the same type of innovation as maybe a more funded startup or a more funded startup or a bigger company. So I think it depends on a little bit what you're trying to do. But if you are looking to, venture capital money and stuff, I think you need to have that radical innovation somewhere in your business model or your products. We didn't talk about products or solutions today. And often, a lot of times I don't even use the word product because a lot of times entrepreneurs start with, I have this product and and this is what it does. And to me, I'd like to think of it as we're creating value. We're not selling products. You can create value in a lot of different ways. Eventually your product might be the best way to create and deliver that value to your customers. But until you get to the point where you can fund and build and sell that product, think of other ways in which you can deliver the value. So in most entrepreneurs think of these things like minimum viable products. So it's saying like there's this grand vision of how we can deliver it. It's very innovative. It's really great. But we're here to create value, and there's a minimal way of doing that at this point in time that can help our business get started. And that might be enough. But I think I got off your question a little bit, but I think the main answer is yes. You have to have a radical innovation for hyper growth, for scalability of your business.
That's great, Sam. Good question, Joanna. I think offhand, we have Joanna actually. She's good. So what we'll do right now, there's some people that came on after you talked, Professor Clarke. You want to just reiterate a little bit what's going on in Innovation Hub, and then we'll pass it to Stephen to start speed networking. Professor Clarke, maybe you could just reiterate the stuff that's going on.
So we're
Innovation Hub.
Yeah. Well, thanks for everybody for coming and participating in Tech School. We have a couple things we're doing with the Innovation Hub at CSUSM. One of those things that we're doing the innovation challenges this semester. We have two of those. One of those is an open challenge where you can bring any type of need that you're working to solve and how you're solving that in an innovative way. And compete. The second one is looking at a specific problem that interests, our community, and that has to do with food insecurity. A lot of students, a lot of people in the community have challenges with, food insecurity. And so we're looking for innovative ways to help solve that problem. So those are two challenges that you can participate in as students if you'd like. And those are coming up due in a couple weeks.
And how would they get to that? Is it just going to be in the Innovation Hub website?
Yeah. So go to csusm.edu/innovation hub, and you can click on the innovation challenge to get more information.
That's great, Professor Clarke. Thank you again. This is actually really solid. It took us back to some of the basics too, so which I love. I'll let Stephen wrap it up, and we'll start a speed networking.
Awesome. Yeah, just to reiterate curling here. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for coming on. You shared some awesome insight today. Thanks for having the opportunity to jump on today and to share some insight, answer some questions, and be a part of Tech School again. But yeah, for anyone who's watching on YouTube, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below. We want this to continue to be an opportunity for learning and growth for everyone who's able to tune in, not just those who are able to tune in live and watch Sam here live on Zoom, but also those who are able to watch this recorded on YouTube. So feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below, share your thoughts, ask a question, whatever that may be. And but as